Oh yeah, this camera's definitely a beast. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I know it's been a hot minute since I made my last video. I'm not gonna give you some long, BS excuse as to why you haven't seen one in a while, but I figured I'd just jump right into it and talk about the Panasonic S5 Mark II. As you probably can tell by the aspect ratio of this video, yeah, I picked one up. It seems like one of the most compelling cameras that has been released in quite some time. I know I made a couple of videos of some recent cameras over the past few months too, but yeah, I sold my A7S III, but I know some people are probably like,
"What? You sold your A7S III? Why would you do that? That's insane."
That camera is so much better than this Panasonic S5 Mark II. Well, I think this camera is incredible for the value. I think it's probably in the past maybe 4 to 5 years, I want to say the closest camera release that I can think of that gives you the best bang for buck, or did give you the best bang for buck, was probably the Sony A7 III when it first came out back in like 2018. This isn't going to be a holistic video talking about every single detail. I will talk about some of the features that have been probably beaten to death already with a lot of the other bigger channels, but I want to talk about some things that I've noticed in the past few days. Maybe you're somebody that, just clicked on this video and you had a pre-order in, or maybe you're just curious about the, Panasonic S5 Mark II. So yeah, let's just jump right into it. The Panasonic S5 Mark II has 6K OpenGate, as you probably can see based off of the aspect ratio that I'm shooting in for this video. And it's pretty incredible because you can use it for all different types of, aspect ratios that you're trying to shoot in, whether that be 16:9 or any sort of vertical content for, shorts, reels, whatever you want to use it for. And I think that makes this camera in and of itself probably the best camera in its price range, considering it's a full frame camera with phase detect autofocus, by the way. And it is the first Panasonic camera to have phase detect autofocus, which is pretty incredible. And so far from my, first couple of tests, it's holding up pretty well. I haven't noticed anything, really funky or anything weird with it. I don't expect it to be up to par with Canon's autofocus in their latest cameras, and even Sony's too. I think it probably will not be quite at that level. And again, this isn't a conclusive thought. I'm open to having my mind changed too, and I'm sure that Panasonic, if they catch things in the future with the autofocus, they'll probably, fix or patch things up with a firmware update. But right now, as of this video, I haven't noticed any difference. Like, I honestly think the autofocus is excellent. Like, it's keeping track of my eye. Yes, sorry, I am looking at the monitor, but overall, I'm pretty impressed. I know I did a previous video on the Canon R6 Mark II that got announced only a few weeks back, or maybe like a month or two back, and that camera has about like 1,053 autofocus points, where this has about 700. I think it's like 770-ish. But honestly, in a real world use case, I don't know if I would ever really notice the difference. Right now I have the autofocus set to human and eye, and I think it's tracking me really well. I don't have the speed set to 5. You can change it in increments from, like, I think -5 all the way up to +5. So right now I think I have it on like 2 or 3, and yeah, so far, if you see anything in the video, you can feel free to let me know in the comments below. And then, another feature too that I want to talk about as well is the fan. I actually think it's pretty incredible that this camera has a fan built into it when you're comparing it to its competition, like the Sony FX30 in this same price point. That's an APS-C camera. But then you've also got the A7 IV, which doesn't have any sort of internal active cooling, and that camera tends to overheat, which I've discussed in a previous video as well, that a number of users out there have experienced overheating issues with the Sony A7 IV, whereas this camera will not have that because of the active cooling. And I don't think it will probably overheat anyway, considering the S5 original. I haven't heard or seen any reports of that overheating for extended periods of time, although I do think that that has a 30-minute record limit, unlike this and the A7 IV. But yeah, that's something that is pretty incredible, especially with the camera at this price point. Now, in regards to the IBIS, I haven't tested it out extensively yet, But I have noticed that when I was walking around outside with the camera, I didn't do any sort of recording with it. I did notice that it was a little smoother than what I remember in the Sony a7S III. And based off a lot of videos out there, I do think the IBIS is probably going to be quite a bit better on this camera. I will do some other videos in the future testing that out too. But yeah, that's something to be pretty excited about too with this camera, just considering the fact that we're getting great autofocus, we're getting incredible IBIS, we're getting 6K OpenGate. Mind you, we also get 6K in 17:9 and 5.9K in 16:9. You also get DCI 4K, which none of the other cameras in this price point, I don't think there's any camera under $3,000 that I can think of. Maybe Blackmagic, Fujifilm. I think Fujifilm does too, but the Sonys don't. The Sonys cap out at 3840 by 2160, which is just regular 4K, not DCI. Which to some people that's not a big deal. It's just it's just a smaller enhancement. But yeah, the Canon R6 Mark II doesn't have DCI 4K. This does, and it is 422 10-bit. Now, the 6K OpenGate is not 422, it is 420, and same with the 6K in the 17:9 aspect ratio, but it's still 10-bit, which is incredible. $2,000 for a 6K camera, full frame, with autofocus, with IBIS, dual SD card slots, an internal cooling fan, and honestly, a pretty robust menu system, because I gotta say, I like it better than the Sony menu system. I really do. I think the Sony menu system it's improved from their older cameras, but yeah, even the one on the a7S III, the a7 IV, and the a1, I think Panasonic's menu system is quite a bit better. I really do. It's just easier to navigate around, and I also like that it has the white balance and the ISO button on the grip. Mind you, the grip also feels a little bit more robust than the Sony bodies, even the new ones. Now, I can't say that about the A7R5. I did play with that camera for a moment at a local camera shop, but it was like maybe for 2 minutes, so I don't have a good comparison on that. But I will say that this definitely feels more like a cross between a Sony full frame body and a Fuji like XH2. I think that's probably the best comparison I can make. So yeah, I really like the body style. It's definitely different from Canon, I will say that. So some things that I've noticed initially with this system is that the L mount seems to be, and this may not be with the S5 Mark II specifically, this is more about the Lumix system as a whole. This is my first Panasonic camera, and I've noticed that the L mount seems to be really tight when you put the lens onto the flange. It definitely, I guess it's a positive, but like when I tried to put it on there, it definitely like feels like it's really almost scraping that mount, which was a little unusual to me, but yeah, it clicked in and it's fine. But yeah, it's definitely a little different from Sony and Canon in that regard. Another thing I've noticed too, and one thing that I kind of hope could be updated in a firmware, it's really not a big deal, but if you're somebody who's a professional, maybe this is probably a bigger deal. The boot up time is a little slower than I've noticed on the Sony and Canon cameras. I think there is another maybe not a second, but like maybe a half second longer delay, or I guess that didn't really make sense there, but it definitely seems like it's a little bit longer to boot up than other cameras in this price point. I know I kind of went off on a tangent there, but yeah, I think, like I said, this camera is a beast. I think for $2,000, you cannot go wrong with this camera. I think there are some things to consider when looking at this camera too, just from a holistic perspective of all the manufacturers out there. If you aren't in the full frame game yet, I would say consider what lenses you use or what focal lengths you're looking to use, because I do think that the L mount right now is a little limited. I do think that the primes are excellent. I think they have a fantastic set of primes. I'm using the 35 f1.8 right now, which is incredible. I'm enjoying it. But I do think that you have a much bigger lens selection with Canon and Sony. Now you can use EF glass on this with the Sigma. I think it's the MC21 adapter. But if you're trying to go native, it is pretty limited right now. I don't feel that that's really a problem for me, but it could be something that you might want to consider. There's no f1.2 glass available for the system, whereas there is on the Sony and the Canon as well, Canon RF and the Sony Alpha series cameras. If you're trying to get into the ecosystem and you want to make a big like production kit, like let's say you want to buy multiple bodies, maybe you're looking for something that could be a good B camera to this camera. There's kind of a pro and a con to this, and I'll try to make this quick, but Canon and Sony, their mount is shared with their APS-C cameras. Like with Canon, you've got the Canon R10, you've got the Canon R7 now, and with Sony, you've got the the Sony A6000, A6300, A6500. There's like so many. You also have the FX30. So you have options in the APS-C line of cameras too as backups, whereas Panasonic, they originally had the Micro Four Thirds system, and that was really all they focused on, and then they jumped into full frame. So there's no APS-C Panasonic cameras, at least none that I know of, and they definitely don't have an L-mount one. But if you think about it, like let's say if you're looking at the Canon R6 Mark II, and maybe you were thinking of picking up an R7 as a backup, or even an R8, but at the same price, you could get the Panasonic S5 Mark II, two of them. And yeah, so then you have two 6K shooting full frame cameras, which is pretty incredible. One thing that I am a little concerned about though is when the Panasonic S5 Mark II X comes out, is I don't think that the features in that camera should be priced at that price point. I think that they should be a little bit higher. And I don't normally say that about electronics and stuff like that. I just think that when this camera got announced and the S5 Mark II X got announced at the same time, if you weren't out looking for a camera to get right away, you're probably better off waiting for the S5 Mark II X, because you get the ProRes recording, you get the RAW over HDMI. By the way, this does have a full HDMI port. You also have wireless live streaming capabilities on that, and you can record to SSDs, which is only a $200 added cost in comparison to this camera. So what that tells me though is that when that camera finally gets released, is this camera gonna suddenly drop in price? Like I do think that this probably will go down $100 or $200, because at that point, anybody that's in the market for a camera like this is probably gonna just go with the S5 Mark II X. So that's something to consider too. I would say if you are looking to get into the full frame market and you are eyeing the S5 Mark II, but you don't need a camera right away, or you don't mind waiting, I would kind of encourage you to go for the S5 Mark II X. And I definitely debated it, but I didn't want to wait too long. I needed a camera, and they say the best camera is the camera that you have with you. So I'm sticking with the S5 Mark II for now. So you're probably wondering, why would you sell your A7S III for the Panasonic S5 Mark II? Well, I actually was already thinking about selling the A7S III for a little bit of time now. I was actually looking at picking up the A7 IV, selling the A7S III, and just pocketing the leftover cash I'd have at the end of that sale, as long as I could get a good deal for it. And I know it was depreciating in value, so I figured, well, I might as well sell it now. It's been out for 2.5 years, almost 3 years now. And nothing wrong with the camera. It's an amazing camera, but I just was not using the 4K 120 or the 4K 60 that much. I know I never used the 4K 120, and the 4K 60 I used maybe a handful of times. So I figured, well, maybe I should just sell it and get the A7 IV instead. But I know that there were some concerns that I had about overheating. And when this camera got announced, I was like, well, I think might be the time to jump ship and go with Panasonic, because I've always heard great things about Panasonics, especially with like features like, waveforms built in, shutter angle, and all the filmmaking tools it provides. Plus you can load LUTs into this as well with the LUT library, which is insane. So yeah, I figured for me, this is probably the better tool, and I was able to keep a little bit of dough at the end of it. So all in all, I think it's a positive, and I'm definitely thrilled with this camera. Also, I think I can actually use it for live streaming with just a USB-C cable. Yeah, that's pretty much it. If you have any questions about the S5 Mark II, like I mentioned before, or just cameras in general, feel free to leave a comment down below, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. But thank you for checking this out, and if you like what you see, feel free to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.